I can't see the halo from here, however.
I think this is kind of facts. I think he's kind of spitting facts. What do you guys think? I kind of like this idea that leftists disguise their own evil through their virtue signaling of being for the oppressed. I think that's facts. Look at the leftists who I've made enemies of, right? Look how disgusting, depraved, and psychotic these people are, all in the name of the oppressed, right? Very sick people. I think he's right about this from personal experience, right?
You could even object, well, you know, that's a pretty pessimistic view of humankind. It's not, by the way. It's just not naive. But anyways, you could object that, and you could say, no, actually, the weight of moral authority is, in fact, on the left, even the radical left, with those who identify with the oppressed and who are working to better their conditions. Okay.
Let me add to what he says. I feel like the issue isn't that they don't admit to their evil, but that they channel their pathological evil when they're actually claiming to be fighting on behalf of the oppressed.
So then let's say, well, let's give those people some power. And if they're actually motivated by compassion and empathy and desire for the working class, if you give them power and you give their ideas power, then as those ideas unfold in real time, you're going to find out, like, do things get better for the working class, let's say, or do they get worse? Because we could consider that like an experiment, consider the outcome proof. I don't know what else you would do. I don't know how else you would come to your decision, because it's just theory till you see it happen. Now, Nietzsche said back in the 18...
He's gonna blame communism, not knowing that the people who Stalin and Mao were purging left and right were these resentful, fucking bitter intelligentsia leftists who always oppress the people, right, with their power. So yeah, they did make life better for the working people, Stalin and Mao, precisely because they purged these fucking leftist pieces of shit. The question is, where does that evil come from? Does it come from the revolution, or does it come from before the revolution? I think it comes before the revolution. I think that evil is attributable to the very evil the revolution was trying to overcome, and which it did eventually overcome. I think this was the inner jihad of the revolution.
People, even now, because it's like the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, are celebrating Lenin. It's like, that's not good. That's like celebrating Hitler.
Explain.
Okay, I'm dead serious about that. It's not good. And the fact that people can dare to think that that's okay means that there's something wrong with the way that we look at history. Lenin was a monster.
How?
If you want to know about that, you can read Solzhenitsyn's writings about Lenin.
Do you mean the famous bullshitter Solzhenitsyn who got caught lying multiple times? That's Solzhenitsyn? You know, Solzhenitsyn, Mr. Peterson, he was a very Russian traditionalist, right? So he was holding the Soviet Union to a very high standard, right? And then when he went to the liberal West, he realized, holy fuck, liberal capitalism is way worse. I was just mad that the Soviets, gave women some equality and shit. It's not like these blue hairs running around. Holy fuck, I want to run back to the Soviet Union and kiss that red flag. He didn't say that, but it's like he realized, holy shit, everything I thought that was evil about the Soviet Union, the capitalist West was way, way, way worse. It's almost like he was like a privileged baby who took it for granted, right? And that is the experience of a lot of Russian conservatives, actually.
Communist apologists say, well, it wasn't Lenin. Lenin was a good guy. He was all motivated by love of the working class. It's like, well, his henchman was Stalin. And if your henchman is Stalin, you're not a good guy.
What's wrong with Stalin?
Lenin was around during the early collectivization.
No, he wasn't, okay? I mean, dude, he was not, all right? If you're talking about war communism, that was during the Civil War, where the Soviet Union was invaded by every major power in the world, and it was life or death, sure, and people were about to starve in the cities, sure. It was very harsh and brutal policy, war communism, but after that, they did not have any collectivization.
You'll find out that he is perfectly willing to have any number of people die as long as his ideological system could be brought into being.
No, he was perfectly willing to have any number of people die before he would ever allow the sovereignty of this new state to be surrendered. And by the way, that is a heroic thing, Mr. Jordan Peterson. When Alexander the Great was besieging one of the famous Levantine city-states, and he discovered that this entire city-state was going to commit collective suicide before surrendering to him, he found that so honorable and so worthy of respect that he backed off. He said, you know what? They're all willing to die. That's how much they believe in whatever, right? That's sovereignty. That's why there's war, Jordan Peterson. What is the slogan of the liberal American Revolution? Give me liberty or give me death. So yes, Lenin, in his capacity as a statesman, will not surrender the sovereignty of the state. I think that's an admirable thing. He will not surrender his sovereignty to foreigners. He will not surrender them to these aristocrats and landowners. He's not going to surrender them to the French banks that the Tsar was in debt to. No, give me liberty or give me death. I think that's a very admirable thing. I think in his capacity as a statesman, that's the only honorable thing one can do. When one is faced with the question of submit or die. Should Stalin have capitulated to the Nazis, since that may have led to less deaths? Potentially. Jordan Peterson, a state is the universal incarnation of a people. It is the representative of a people. It is the people, insofar as they can articulate an interest and a reality. When a state forfeits its sovereignty and submits to its enemy, be it the enemies of the people, aka the former stratum, which excluded 90% of the population from the reality of the state, or foreigners who planned on carving up Russia and stealing its resources and enslaving its people, it is your responsibility to defend the sovereignty of your state at all costs, even on bond of great tragedy and death. It's a war to the death, no surrender. That's what Lenin believed. Why should he have surrendered? For some humanitarian reason to preserve life? Isn't it you who says, Jordan Peterson, that life in and of itself must be meaningful? Is there not a threshold at which point life must be sacrificed for the sake of meaning? Everyone believes that. You believe that, don't you? When you go to war, when someone invades your country, should you just surrender to the enemy because it's going to lead to less retaliations? Jordan Peterson, let me ask you a question. If an invader invades your homeland and you take up arms to fight against this invader, and as a consequence, the invader bombs your villages, kills your women and children, starves your people, millions die, should you surrender to the enemy or should you keep fighting? I think you would agree with me, Jordan Peterson. I think you would agree with me. I think we should have a talk. It's not about an ideology. This is a concrete reality. This is a concrete struggle between the narod, the people, and their enemies. Remember, 90% of the Russian people were completely non-existent for the Tsar's state. They did not exist. They were nothing. They were less than animals. They weren't part of modern civilization proper whatsoever. Only the Soviet state gave them recognition.
So there's no celebrating Lenin. There's no work.
I think there is. I think there is celebrating Lenin. I think there is celebrating Lenin as the one, the Prometheus, who gave the Russian people, for the first time in modern history, recognition. I think he deserves to be celebrated for that.
Marxist hip revolutionaries, and he's our idol. It's like, there's none of that. Not if you're decent.
I think I'm decent.
Well, there was death of the kulaks. I told you about that. There was the Ukrainian famine. That's 6 million gone there.
Jordan Peterson, is there any transition from pre-modern agriculture to industrial agriculture or industrialization that does not involve a calamitous loss of life? What happened in the Soviet famine compared to the atrocities that gave rise to European modernity? Surely you're aware of the turmoil of late feudalism or early capitalism, be it within Europe or abroad. You know as well as I do the human price of the industrialization of the modern West. So why is Russia a unique evil for trying to independently pursue a modernization? The first country to pursue this independent modernization. Of course, there's bound to be a catastrophe and a disaster because it originally was that, right? So what? They should have submitted to the Western capitalist powers, forfeited their own sovereignty?
There was the rise of the Gulag state because it turned out that Russia, the Soviet Union, couldn't run on the principles that it had laid down as sacrosanct. They just didn't work, so you had to...
Well, I'll tell you this much. At the height of the Soviet Gulag system, as a proportion of the total Soviet population, there are far more people in U.S. prisons. The per capita imprisonment rate is far, far higher in the United States than at the peak of the Soviet Gulags.
Enslave everybody and run your economy.
No, the Gulags comprised not the entire population. So I don't know why you're saying they enslaved everyone.
As a slave state, essentially.
Penal labor had existed in every country, Jordan Peterson. It was a norm. Is it slavery? Well, if you're going to say it's slavery, at least say that there's nothing especially egregious about the Soviet system.
And try not to kill the people in the gulags so fast that you can't suck some productive labor out of them. There's the death of tens of millions of people. We don't even know. The estimates range from 15 to 60 million.
Can you show me where you're getting those estimates?
Like, we won't get too picayune about the numbers because after the first 10 million, you kind of made your point. And the fact that we don't know between 15 and 60 is actually an indication of the horror.
No, I think it's an indication of the extent to which anti-Soviet scholars have tried to demonize the Soviet Union and Soviet history.
Because our count is off by tens of millions, and that's only within the last century. And then there was the 1956 crackdown on Hungary and the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia.
The invasion of Hungary and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, nothing in comparison to the United States' actions to promote the policy of containment of communism. There, the Soviet Union is being begged by the party leaders of the respective countries to come and fix the situation. They obliged. Now you blame the fault of thermonuclear confrontation exclusively on the Soviets. Dr. Peterson, are you familiar with Operation Unthinkable, where Churchill wanted to exterminate the entire Soviet population? And the only reason Operation Unthinkable was not pursued was because the Soviet Union acquired nuclear weapons in self-defense. Dr. Peterson, I recommend you reevaluate your grasp of the history of the 20th century.
In 1962 and in 1984, we were seconds away from complete annihilation, right? During the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Dr. Peterson, who had invented nuclear weapons? Please enlighten us. Who created them and who used them?
And Castro, as he admitted to Jimmy Carter, in case any of you are Castro fans, which you shouldn't be, that
I am.
He was perfectly willing to have Cuba annihilated if it would have meant the defeat of the United States.
That's a hero. That's the stuff of heroism. You believe in the West, right, Dr. Peterson? This is a Greek hero. This is a classical hero. What was the Roman saying? The Roman saying was, "It is sweet and noble to die for one's country." That comes from the Romans. This is the legacy of the West, of the logocentric West, which is a great and honorable legacy, actually. This is honor. Honor has stakes, Dr. Peterson. You seem like Nietzsche's last man. You don't believe in sacrifice. You don't believe in high stakes. You don't believe in willing to risk the annihilation of the cosmos for the sake of principle, for the sake of honor, for the sake of justice. You are not Western enough, Dr. Peterson.